Is Elden Ring inaccessible for most gamers? I don't think that's true. I don't think most is the right word here. Is it inaccessible for some gamers? I would say yes. But most? Elden Ring is like the easiest Dark Souls game or FromSoft game, whatever, however you want to say it, that's ever released. You know, it's way easier than Sekiro, easier than Dark Souls 1, 2, 3 also. Um, just because of the amount of choices it gives you and the fact that it's open world. So if you like run into a boss that's just unbeatable for you, then just do other things until you get more gear, more spells, whatever it may be, and then you come back. So
is
let's take a
Elden
look.
Ring inaccessible?
Alright, what's going on, guys? For people that have been around in the Souls community for a long time, know that there is one thing that has persisted ever since the very first game, and that is the conversation around difficulty and accessibility in the Souls games. And it's a topic that we've covered numerous.
Yeah, it's a topic that's like literally brought up every single time a new Dark Souls game comes out.
Times here on the channel, but there's
the people that get into this shit, I cannot believe it. Like, yes, Elden Ring and Dark Souls are hard games, but they're not that hard.
No, not at all.
Something different about the article that we're going to cover today, because I saw the headline of this article and I thought it was just going to be another basic one about an easy mode.
You know, Elden Ring and Dark Souls should have difficulty options, of course.
But I believe it opens up a lot of interesting questions.
You know what's funny is I'm actually of the theory of why not? You know what I mean? Because it's like, yes, I understand that the game was intended to be played in a certain way, but it's like it's single player games. Like, does it really make a difference if they had an easy mode, or call it story mode if you want? Yeah, I don't know. I've never cared about games having difficulty options. Like, it's never made me think a game is worse because it had a story mode or an easy mode.
That we in the Souls community do need to ask ourselves. But what really got me was a take from another game developer about this article that quite literally blew.
Well, magic isn't like super OP. It really also depends on the kind of magic spell you're using, and if you know where to get it.
My mind, and not in a good way. So we're gonna break all this down today and try to figure out if the Souls games are not accessible enough and need difficulty options. But as we get into all that today, you guys know I'm chasing.
I don't think it needs them. I just don't see why not. I don't think it would make the games worse.
Down 100k subs here on the channel. So if you're new around here, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. We cover all things.
Yeah, this guy does really good videos. Like, you should definitely subscribe to him if you like watching like From Software, like Dark Souls, Elden Ring type content. This guy has tons of videos about it.
Elden Ring
yeah,
and From
I've seen his other videos.
During the
They're really good.
Elden Ring DLC, there's a lot going on that you're not going to want to miss. But with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into this article. The piece in question that we're going to be taking a look at today is Elden Ring and Souls games should have difficulty options. The time has come for the Souls franchise to become more accessible. This is from Dual Shockers. Now, normally when I cover these types of articles, I tend to just roast them out the gate, but the discussion around accessibility specifically has grown a lot recently. So I want to take this
I think the discussion around accessibility growing is around actual accessibility, like controller options for people that are paralyzed.
Yeah.
Like, we're not really
or even changing the color scheme for like people with colorblind. I know a lot of games have them, but a lot of times they're implemented pretty poorly.
Talking about accessibility as in making games easier. It's just people having better options for, you know, doing things whenever they're like disabled in some way.
Yeah.
Merits and see if we can be convinced. So let's go ahead and get into it. Money unsurely spent. When I consider buying games,
exactly
in this
what I just
Elden
said.
Ring and Dark Souls, many factors go into my decision. I look at what reviewers are saying and I try to gauge the game's levels of accessibility. For those who might not know, I was born with one arm, so when it comes to purchasing games, I need to know if I can play them first. While I'm not against learning opponent strategies and movements, I am against being unable to choose my adventure's difficulty, especially when it comes to my first playthrough. So right off the bat, one thing I do want to commend about this article is that it is actually written by somebody with a disability.
This is not, that's actually good, because a lot of times people talk about accessibility and it's because like they play the game for an hour and they can't kill the tree sentinel because it's their first Souls game ever, and then they go and rage write an article about it.
Exactly. It's not a case of get good. It's more like I only have one hand. But it's also a case of like, do games? Is there? I don't know how to phrase this without sounding like kind of mean, but like as a on a game developer's end, is it really worth investing in the resources it would take to add a accessibility option to your game so that one-handed or one-armed people, for whatever reason, whether it's missing or disabled or doesn't really matter, to play the game one-handedly? I think instead of putting that on the developers, I think that should be put on like control makers. You know what I mean? To me, that makes more sense that way instead of it being in every single game. Have a control where it's kind of like tested and developed for people with one hand available to them.
When we get these articles about difficulty, they're written by people who aren't disabled on behalf of others who might be, and it makes it overall very disingenuous.
It is.
But having one arm is very much something that's going to inhibit your ability to play games. My first question though would be, why is difficulty the automatic solution? This sounds like an issue with personal movement and functionality. So
somebody needs to tell this guy about Comet Azer.
To me, the solution that I see would be a controller that you can use with one hand. Now, granted, I'm not a disabled person, but I think the exact problem is something they should address. Why is the logic not to supplement that lack of movement? I'm not sure I totally see the connection with difficulty here, but that's just my initial thoughts. Let's go ahead and keep reading.
I mean, it's obvious. If things are easier, they're not... It gives you more time to react, which if you have one hand and things are like kind of annoying to do, like the game being easier lets you make more mistakes with basically there's more cushion for mistakes. So if the game's easier and you're playing with one hand, obviously more than likely will result in mistakes being made. An easier mode will allow those players to make those mistakes without dying.
Well, I think the amount of times that you have to like move around and everything does make it more accessible. Like, yeah, sure. But you're right. The way to solve this problem is not to just make games like as a default easier for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I said earlier in that it shouldn't be up to the developers to do that. And an easier mode may not solve it for all cases either. So it's not even that good of a solution.
It's more to like give those people different tools to solve the problem.
Yeah.
Which I personally think that Elden Ring is probably the most... Like, there are so many things that you can do in Elden Ring that will make your character more powerful in a boss fight or in the game in general, that I actually think that Elden Ring is simultaneously... Like, I wouldn't say it's the hardest, because I think Sekiro is, like, just by default the hardest. Yes. But it's the second hardest From Software game ever, and it is also the easiest From Software game ever.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. That's what I was saying, like, just, it's an open world game, so if you run into something, just go out and grind. But by also its nature of being open world is you can run into things that you are not ready for.
Like, it is both, depending on how you choose to play it.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the type of game, I normally play on medium at first. On medium difficulty, games present a nice amount of challenge for me. I do not feel my progress as being badly hindered, and I do not feel like I threw my $70 away. But when I play a game like Elden Ring or Dark Souls, I can't help but feel defeated. Not just in the sense of losing a fight, but as if the series is not made for me. There's a real sense of feeling left out. And I mean this in the most respectful way possible, but they're absolutely correct. The series wasn't made for them. Not to be insensitive here, but the game was made for people with two arms, which is likely 99.9% of their base. But let's go ahead and be
and that's across all games. Like, it's not a rude thing to state obvious facts. If you made a game that was intentionally designed for someone with just one hand, it would have to be extremely simple, like Vampire Survivors.
True. I mean, that is true. Like, you can't, absolutely.
totally honest here. These games are not that hard. Elden Ring offers a numerous amount of ways to make the game easier, aside from a standard difficulty slider. As soon as you get to the first area, you can summon another player to help you on your journey, which dramatically decreases the difficulty of the game. There already are difficulty options in this game. Heck, I just saw an article yesterday of somebody who made a spirit summon that can solo all the bosses. Not to mention you can go and farm runes and get over leveled with no limit. So anytime I see this conversation come up and they don't mention those things, you automatically know they don't actually mean it. And even
it's not that they don't actually mean it, it's that they beat their head against the wall against it for like maybe a few hours and then they never tried to solve the problem.
Yeah, they don't do any kind of research on if someone has found a solution to the problem. They just immediately go into crying about it mode.
They just want,
like, they don't look up videos, they don't look up articles, Reddit, because the information is just all over the place. They don't want to do that.
the game to change because they're not looking at solving problems.
Yeah,
recently,
exactly.
there's been a spur of people doing challenge runs on Elden Ring, setting up control schemes that utilize other parts of the body like the feet, the mouth, even using their voice to control their character, and all of them beat the game. So once again, I mean this in the most respectful and sensitive way, but if you have a physical disability that limits you from grasping the controller, I would look into alternative controlling methods, and not expect the game to change for you. And not to mention...
And that's exactly what I mentioned in the beginning, is to have a controller that has been developed and tested to for those with one hand. I don't know if it exists. If it doesn't, then look at other options. See videos. See if anyone else has run into your specific issue, and maybe they found a solution.
I think that's very true. There's a lot of people that it's like everybody in the world is going to come at something from a slightly different perspective, and you can never design anything to where every single type of person, regardless of like what their ailment is going to have the same chance at it.
Yeah, because then that's also the case. Like someone with a ton of experience with FromSoft games or Dark Souls games in general, they're going to have absolutely no problem with most FromSoft games, whether it's Dark Souls or Elden Ring, or even Sekiro if they've played enough. But someone who has zero experience and say they only play like games like Animal Crossing or stuff like that, where it's not really skill based, they're going to have a way tougher time. But at the same time, like, they can't design the game for both at the same time, and they didn't. Like, people who really have been playing Dark Souls games like over and over, that's really just their game. A lot of them were complaining that Elden Ring was too easy, but they didn't add a hard mode for those people either. So, which I think would be interesting. I don't see why not. Like, I'm always of that camp of, would it make the game worse by adding it? No? Okay, then why not add it? If it's not that difficult. I'm assuming a difficulty slider wouldn't be that hard. Just increase HP of the enemies. But I'm not sure if they would be more involved with that.
It's just not realistic.
And that overcoming that physical limitation with a new control style would allow you to play every game better, not just Elden Ring. But let's keep reading. I am playing a game by myself, and how I choose to play does not make another person's achievements on a harder difficulty any lesser. It does not hinder the developer's vision because I
do think that it does, to an extent, because like with a lot of games, people take it as like a rite of passage that they were able to like complete a certain game or beat something.
I don't actually agree with that. Only because maybe some people do. I think that's a little weird. It's a video game. It's not a degree. It's not a license. It's not something that was earned in a fair environment, I guess. I'm not sure what the right word is there, but basically it's like, the reason why I don't is because I know of cheat codes. You know what I mean? Cheat codes have been around since, like, I don't know, the PlayStation, Super Nintendo, probably. So it's like, even before that, maybe. I have no idea when the first cheat code was. But it doesn't matter. Like, everyone knows cheat codes. And nowadays, with every game, like, if it's an offline game or a single-player game, it's 100% going to have some kind of cheat code discovered within, like, a week of it releasing. If it's multiplayer, I mean, you could probably pay for cheats. You know, I I wouldn't do that, but everyone knows the options there. Whether they want to do it or not is different. So I don't actually agree with like the rite of passage thing, because it's like, how do you know that person didn't cheat? There's no way to know.
And I think that adding a difficulty slider to that makes it less important. It absolutely.
I mean, he's right, it does, but at the same time, I don't think it's that important. Like, for example, Witcher 3, to me, is one of the best single player games, period. Um, Playing the hardest difficulty on that game is way harder than Dark Souls, at least in my opinion. And yeah, like I don't see it as like if someone tells me they beat Witcher, I'm just like, okay. Like I don't care. It's also a case where someone tells me they beat the Dark Souls games. I'm like, oh, okay. Like they're not meant to be super hard to a point that you can't beat them. Like the only times I get impressed with people beating a game is like Jump King or those kind of games where it's just only because it's annoying to play. So I'm like, damn, okay. Like it's not only difficult, but it's annoying. So I see it as more of an achievement than like Dark Souls, because Dark Souls is at least fun. So as long as you're, playing the game, having fun, like doesn't matter how hard it is. Maybe my taste, not taste, my viewpoint is just really weird. Where it's like if you do something that's difficult and annoying, I have more respect for it than if you just did something that's just difficult but fun.
And this is like, I'm not saying it's a good thing this is the case, but I'm saying this is the case.
Others are playing on hard mode. There will always be those who welcome an immediate challenge. I am
Yep.
someone who
Yep.
prefers to build up to challenge. I have not played Cuphead in months because I get frustrated to the point where I do not want to play anymore. Now this right here is the standard
Same.
easy mode argument that we've heard numerous times
I
before.
have two arms.
And every time it's brought up, we
Yeah, Cuphead's really fucking difficult. But that's pretty simple, so I don't see why you wouldn't be able to play it efficiently with one hand. If you're already used to it at this point. I'm not sure though.
know that it does not hold water. And the main reason for that is that the initial statement they put in that paragraph is immediately untrue. So people are never going to be happy. But the main thing that this argument doesn't address when it comes to the Souls games is that the main selling point of these games is satisfaction through overcoming challenge. And one of the primary factors that creates that satisfaction.
I think that is true, but I also think the games are just fundamentally very good.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a phenomenal game. It runs incredibly well. It feels really good when you start learning the game and you're like dodging the attacks or blocking the attacks or parrying, whatever it is. Like you mastering the mechanics feel great because they're done well. But at the same time, it is true. Like that also ties into what he said in that you're overcoming something and getting that satisfaction. I think whether it's through the bosses or just your normal gameplay, that applies to it.
Like, it's not even about the challenge. Like, I kind of like it because the reason why I like a game like Elden Ring so much is that Elden Ring asks you to get the number 4, and it doesn't matter if you do 2 plus 2, 3 plus 1, or 5 minus 1, or any other variation.
Oh yeah, that's one of my favorite parts about it, as well as just the options of playing the game. Like, there's just so many. And I think that's why, I think I mentioned it before, why Sekiro is unfortunately my least favorite of the FromSoft games.
All you have to do is get to that number 4. And the amount of dynamic problem solving that you can have to do that makes it interesting. I think that's what makes it super fun, is because whenever you accomplish something in the game, it's either because you've created a strategy or you've realized some sort of strategy, and that makes you better at the game and better at doing it. Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely agree there.
Is value through scarcity.
I still think
and
the other one
only way
applies
that
though as
works
well.
is if the challenge has a standard. And since everybody is different, it's up to you to figure out how you can overcome that challenge. And that's the way it's always been with these games. That's why they're RPGs. That's why the story is so abstract, is because it's not the primary reason you play these games. Overall, I think it's really disingenuous and honestly extremely unfair to reduce a game's entire accessibility to simply a difficulty slider. But in order to understand this idea it further, I want to show you guys a response to this article by another game developer. In a comment to the tweet that posted this article, somebody said, accessibility options absolutely, things like colorblind options, one-handed modes, audio cues and such are great. Difficulty options are unnecessary for these games for so many reasons, not least of which is that the games make their own difficulty, especially Elden Ring. And I absolutely agree with
That's
that.
incredibly
But then I see a
well
response
said.
from Ian Hamilton here who says, everything you listed is a difficulty option. That's literally why they exist. Now, I didn't understand that at first, and
They tie into the difficulty of the game. That is true. But at the same time, you could say that about literally everything. So if you're going to go with that argument, it's too broad to even argue against, because you're literally saying, like, it being brighter, so you seeing better, is a difficulty an option, difficulty option. It's like, that's ridiculous. No one ever does that because it's too abstract of a argument to even consider. It's honestly stupid. It's really what it is.
Wait, colorblind mode is a difficulty option?
Well, if you're colorblind and the game doesn't have colorblind mode, the game is more difficult because you can't really see things properly. So, like I said, the argument is just way too vague. It's true, but it's true to an extent that it's pointless to even say it.
What?
I'll explain why in a minute, but look at the continuation of this thread. To that tweet, somebody else responded, no, those only alter how you interact with the game. Difficulty options are much more often how much damage an enemy does, how much you deal, and how much can it take. Audio cues and color correction don't change how much everything punches for.
That's true.
Which again, I tend to agree with, and I think most people would, because when we think of difficulty sliders, that's typically what they change.
Yeah, that or it changes like the aggressiveness of the enemy, whether there's different more phases to an enemy, different move sets, like stuff like that.
Things like how much damage enemies deal, how much HP they
Right.
have, and how fast they are. I would say the vast majority of the time when you change it,
I think that yes, for difficulty in video games, that is primarily what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Like 9 times out of 10.
difficulty of the game, that's what gets altered. But y'all gotta see this. This guy explains that he's a longtime accessibility developer, working on games like The Last of Us 2 and on the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And if you go to his page, the pinned tweet is a definition of difficulty that quite honestly blew my mind. Difficulty equals capability versus barrier. Disability equals mismatched interaction between capability and barrier. Accessibility equals avoiding unnecessary mismatch between capability and barrier. Now, I want to think about this for a minute.
Okay.
According to this equation, it implies that any one player's subjective capability determines the difficulty of the game. So effectively basing the accessibility and difficulty arguments not on the vast majority of players that are going to be playing a game, but on the outliers in capability, which personally, in the most respectful way, I find to be ridiculous. I simply don't understand.
Yeah, there's always going to be somebody that, and here's what I think he's trying to say. So, if you are mentally capable of being able to beat a boss, but the barrier is that you only have one hand, so the solution to that is you make a controller that you can use with one hand. Do you see what I'm saying? So, like, it's basically giving people other ways to...
Let's read this. Difficulty equals capability versus barrier. I think the problem is he does not say what barrier is. So if he's saying barrier is you overcoming it, as in whether you beat the boss or not. So capability versus you beating the boss. So your skill versus the boss, I guess, determines what a difficulty is. I guess that in a sense makes sense. Like, if you consider yourself a very good player, but you cannot beat the boss, it's a very hard game. If you consider yourself a poor player and you still beat the boss, it's considered an easy game. Is maybe what I'm assuming is what this is saying. It's hard to say because it's like we don't really know what he's using this term for exactly. Or even this term, to be fair. Disability, mismatched interaction between capability and barrier. So mismatched interaction between the two things. So something that is affecting your fight against that boss through your own interaction. Let's Oh, sorry. Food is here. Okay, so let me see if we can go over this again. So I'm assuming by this he's saying your disability affected that fight in some way. So that's why this is disability, because it's the interaction between these two things was affected, I'm assuming mismatched in a negative way then. So that does make a bit more sense. Accessibility is avoiding unnecessary mismatches between that fight. So accessibility options are, I'm assuming that's what he means, right? Options that as actual like things you can toggle and change, helps you avoid the things that led to your disability affecting that fight. Yeah, I do agree. So I think what's weird is this is correct. Like I actually don't disagree with this post here. If what I assume is correct, and he's talking about barrier in terms of just overcoming the trials in the game, whether it's boss or whatever it may be.
To use the tools that exist in the game, which I think makes perfect sense. Sure. Yeah, get foot pedals or something like that. Yeah.
Disrespectful way, I find to be ridiculous. I simply don't understand how that can be the paradigm for accessibility in the gaming industry when we're talking about video games. I mean, unless I'm missing something major here, by that standard, it sounds impossible to make a game accessible. Now,
I think what he means is that a person has the capability of being able to beat a boss, but because of their disability, like they are mentally and like they have the mental acuity, they have the knowledge of the fight, they have everything that they need to beat the boss. They're just missing some form of like physical augmentation to allow them to input the commands. And that's what the barrier is the physical input. So I think if you look at it from that angle, then yes, that's very true. Skill issue? No. Why would it be wait, what?
It's semi a skill issue because I think most cases you could get by it, but I still think I mean I kind of agree with Hasman, but I do think like with what I said is it could be anything, like anything on your end, interacting with the game, causing you to change the paradigm of capability versus barrier would consider be part of the disability part, and then having options that avoid those, it would be accessibility.
Yeah, no. What do you mean? Yeah, it's not a skill issue at all. It's fundamentally not a skill issue.
I think the confusion between these arguments is coming from is that the traditional idea of difficulty places that difficulty on the character within the game, therefore altering factors that would affect your character, while the developer here is seeing difficulty as the barriers that affect the player, which I don't believe is possible to address within the game, because there is always going to be somebody less capable, so how far are we going to take it? And I'll give you an example of what I mean. This developer says he worked on The Last of Us 2.
I think the solution is to make tools that allow people to function on the same level that a person who is completely able-bodied can function at. That's really what the solution is.
Yeah.
accessibility options in The Last of Us 2
It doesn't make the
was that
it doesn't
players
make
had
the
the
game
option
easier.
to completely skip puzzles. You would literally remove portions of the game as an accessibility option. So are we going to apply that same logic to the Souls games? Or are we going to give players the option to skip bosses? Because when this conversation comes up,
Yeah.
bosses are the most inaccessible part of the Souls games.
Well, I think for The Last of Us, I think it's not that big of a deal to let people skip puzzles for The Last of Us because people don't really play that. Like, my understanding is that this is mainly a visual novel that has gameplay features. People love the story of the game. The story is the main character, not the gameplay. Whereas in Elden Ring, the gameplay is the main character and the story is just kind of an overlay that some people understand.
I still don't really agree. Because it's like if you really aren't interested in the gameplay, you can just watch videos on YouTube or wherever with just the cutscenes or walkthroughs with no commentary. You know what I mean?
According to these journalists and
yeah.
developers. Now, I don't want to sit here and be an alarmist. I do think there's a conversation to be had, but I want to leave my conclusion with this thought. Does a game have to be for everybody? Part of that
No.
equation was capability versus barrier. So at what point do we stop tearing down the barriers?
Yeah, but the problem is that was what difficulty equals. He wasn't talking about excess. Well, maybe he changed it up, but based on, let me bring it back up. Right now we're on 1541. So let's go back to that post. This is only including difficulty. So accessibility is not even in the equation yet. So just difficulty is this. So adding accessibility options that affect this is not what this exact post is referring to. So that I think this what were we watching? I already forgot. Oh, Asmon doesn't even have it on here. Okay. That sucks. I'll have to find them. I forgot their name. Man. Doesn't really matter. But anyways, I think he's confused. Like, he doesn't realize when they put this here, difficulty equals capability versus barrier. That is true. This by itself, cut it out and leave it by itself is actually true. That the difficulty, because difficulty is also a personal thing. So a lot of people, some people see Elden Ring as very easy. Some people see it as very hard. So it's a personal reflection on how you see the difficulty. But these two aren't. So disability is the interaction between capability and barrier. So basically the gameplay. If the interaction is being affected, obviously you, the person interacting with it, is now being affected by that. It's a disability. Your disability is affecting the difficulty. And then if you have options that avoid those interactions or mitigate them, that is where the accessibility options come into play. Let's go back.
Instead, focus on building up the capability. I'll leave that up to you guys in the comments. But anyways though, that's gonna pretty much do it for the video today. I just wanted to have this discussion because the Souls games are always kind of the ones that get kicked by these journalists and developers.
Oh yeah, and like the reality is like I bet you could play the Souls games a lot easier with one hand than something like Dance Dance Revolution. Or some other game that's like one of these rhythm games, some kind of crazy shit like that. That's going to be way, way harder to play if you're talking about doing it with like one hand or like with no tools. Yeah, Guitar Hero.
Yeah.
As being inaccessible, when time and time again they're the highest rated games that people absolutely love. But if you were to read some of these articles,
I think that if somebody is complaining about one of these games, I wish that it was like a law that if you complain about Elden Ring or Dark Souls or something like that, you have to post the unedited raw footage of you playing the game. I think that should be required.
Comments by these developers, you'd think they're nothing more than,
at the very least, it would be incredibly interesting, like really fun to watch,
exclusive and oppressive. And
especially if it's like who is that dude with the Act Man who they got into a big beef with hot takes. I don't know why I keep thinking it's someone else. Like I don't want to say the name because I know it's not them. Man, my memory is fucking shit. What am I thinking of? Quantum TV. That's who I was thinking of. Jesus. Yeah, imagine like if Quantum released his actual gameplay.
I just don't think that's fair. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like on it and subscribe if you're new around here. The 1-year anniversary of Elden Ring is just around the corner, and I think there might be something big that happens on that day. So I will see you in the next one.
Oh
Hopefully.
yeah, that is coming soon, isn't it? Holy shit, I can't even imagine that.
That'd be really cool if they announced some DLC.
Killa beat the game with one hand. Yeah, but like that guy's like one of the best like Dark Souls. I remember he was one of the best Dark Souls 3 players, right? So it's not really a big surprise. But yeah, I mean, it's already been a year. Yeah, I know. It's crazy, right? Like what the fuck? So yeah, I mean, I think that for a lot of these games, like you can't make a game that has like super challenging like mechanics if you have to design it that, you know, somebody can only use like 2 or 3 inputs at the same time. Like, I don't think you should expect that every single game has to be played by a person with one hand. That's such a massive limitation. And then also, like, what about somebody who's blind? What about somebody who's deaf? What about...
Yeah, no, I think I touched upon that. Like, it's not worth it. Also, like, because to figure it out, like, it does take a lot of work. And if each game developer has to do that, it's just not worth it for most, if not all.
About somebody who is X, Y, and Z at the same time. Like, this is like an endless problem-solving session that just you always lose at the end of. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that's the solution. I think that the solution is to build better technology to allow those people to function as if they were able-bodied.
Exactly.
I don't think the solution to that is...
Which I think is only a matter of time. Like, we have VR helmets, like, and that's only going to get cheaper and cheaper, where it gets to the point where VR probably is going to be the norm, which would be pretty cool. But, and even past that, to get, like, the whole, like, immersion thing, like, sort of online, I think that's just a matter of when than if.
It's just make the game easier. Like, give people different types of controllers, give people different types of, you know, like I don't know, like VR or something like that. I don't know. You link the video? Yeah, I'll link it again just so you guys can see. Yeah, I like this video a lot. I mean, Ziostorm, I watch a lot of his like Elden Ring videos. Very big fan of this kind of stuff.
Same here.
So I think also it has some good conversations inside of it for gaming as a whole. So.
Oh yeah, I agree. But like I said, towards the end of it, I do think he was not reading that post properly. I could be wrong. I'm not sure. But I feel like that's not what the guy was talking about, because it's clearly stated difficulty equals capability versus barrier. And it had nothing to do with accessibility options, at least at that
I do
point.
like watching them and getting into that. What if a game's not for you, even if because of that disability? Well, no game is for everybody, right? That's just the way it goes.
Yeah.
Difficulty is subject to change when talking with different people. Exactly. Yeah, unrealistic to expect every game to cater or care about every audience. Yeah, it's impossible to do that.
Yep.
And as an accessibility option for all games, it's called YouTube Long Plays. Well, there is that too. Yeah, you can just watch somebody else play the game.
Unless you're blind and deaf, but yeah.
It's a lot easier to add a difficulty slider than to bring a new controller onto the market. Yeah, I think so too. But it's like with a lot of games, I think that with Elden Ring, if somebody beat Elden Ring or somebody beat like Dark Souls or Sekiro or whatever, they still had to solve the same problems that you did. It's not like somebody can just play the game on easy mode and then kill Melania and then, you know, they have the same thing you did. And I think that's what makes it so fulfilling for people.
Personally, not for me, because I just don't care how other people play their games. Like, I don't really watch like no hit runs. Maybe a little bit, like for the bosses. But speed runs I'll watch. Just like the ones that specifically are tied to like difficulty, like no hit runs or stuff like that. Like, I just don't really care too much.
Is that it's like a universal pass fail, and there's no easy mode for it, even though anybody who's actually played the game a lot knows that there is, but it doesn't function in the same dynamic or the same like binary way, like easy, hard. I'll be right back.
Yeah, no. I do agree with a lot of that, but I also disagree with some of it as well. But it's whatever. Like, I'm trying to see how to say this right. I think I've said it enough in the video. It's basically it's easier, not easier, but it's better in the long term if they can just work on products specifically for disabilities versus each game developer having to do that on their end, if that makes sense.